fantasy readers. This is Karyne Norton, your fellow book binger, and you are listening to the Finding Fantasy Reads podcast, where you can test out a new fantasy story every single week to find your next favorite author. Today, I'm featuring two different stories by two different authors. Both stories can be found in the Tales of Ever After anthology, which was put together by a Fellowship of Fantasy. It's a few years old, but I was excited to find several nuggets inside. The first story is written by H.L. Burke, and it's told from the perspective of a lamp. But considering it's an inanimate object talking, it packs a lot of emotional punch. Heidi Burke has jumped from one fandom to another, being at times completely obsessed with various books, movies, or television series. Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and Star Trek all took their turns. But she has grown to be what she considers a well-rounded connoisseur of geek culture. Married to her high school crush, who is now a U.S. Marine, she has moved multiple times in her adult life, but believes that home is wherever her husband, two daughters, and pets are. This first story is narrated by Paeter Frandsen, host of Christian Geek Central, and it's short and sweet, which is why I'm featuring two today. So be sure to stick around for the second story. Spoiler alert, it has a mermaid. For now, please enjoy At the Corner of Elm and Main by H.L. Burke.
Abner Elmstreet stood his post day after day, night after night, on the corner of Elm and Main, back straight, eyes bright, never wavering in snow or wind. Passers-by depended on Abner for light in the dark, and he did his job well. One might think from this description that Abner was a stalwart, loyal fellow, which was true, but the sad truth in the matter was that, as a lamppost, Abner lacked any say in the matter. The city planners had not consulted him before he was placed on the corner of Elm and Main. They did not check on him after his installation to see how he was faring. On occasion, they would send someone by to refresh him with a new coat of shiny black paint, and of course, the ancient lamplighter showed up every night to light the candle within his glass case. But no one, not the city planners, not the ancient lamplighter, not any of the thousands of passers-by, ever asked Abner his opinion on his position, or on anything for that matter. No, in all ways Abner was stuck. However, while Abner's feet, figurative as they might be, were stuck in the sidewalk, his mind never ceased to wander. It wandered after the birds who flew overhead, following them to faraway shores. He watched the carriages go up and down the street in front of him and imagined the places they might go. When a parade passed him by honoring a great hero who had accomplished mighty deeds, Abner imagined himself achieving feats of strength and cunning. Abner dreamed many dreams. As years passed, however, and Abner stayed, he began to despair. "What I want doesn't matter, for I will never leave this corner," he said to himself. "My fate is to stay, to light the path of those around me, and never to move." The only one who knew of Abner's wishes, or that Abner could wish at all, for that matter, was the little old woman who fed the birds on the corner of Elm and Main. She was a peculiar soul, ancient and wizened, with a face like a shriveled apple and hair like soot-stained snow. During the day she would sit on the bench beside Abner, scattering seeds and crumbs to the pigeons and the wrens and listening to the woes of man, bird, and post. When Abner sighed, she'd nod. When he moaned, she'd gaze at him with sympathetic eyes. Abner wasn't sure why the old woman could understand or where she got her unlimited supply of food for the birds when she herself was clad in naught but tattered rags. But she had a way about her. If a child was lost on Elm or Main, she could send them in the right direction without knowing so much as their name. If an item of value fell from a pocket, she would return it to its rightful owner. If a cabby mistreated his horse, she'd wave her black umbrella at him, and the man, not the horse, would come up lame. She was one of those beings right beneath our noses who we never notice, but who in their humility carry ancient and powerful magic. As years turned to decades, The city stopped sending around painters to scrub away the rust and give Abner a yearly coat of paint. One day, a naughty child cracked a pane of Abner's glass with a stone. The elderly lamplighter clicked his tongue every time he saw it, but due to something called a budget, no one ever replaced the pane. After that, Abner's flame wavered and sometimes went out altogether on blustery nights. Still, he stood tall. After all, those who traveled that stretch of elm and mane needed his glow to show the cracks in the sidewalk that might cause them to stumble, or to illuminate the bench where they could sit and wait for a late-night cab. Still, it would be good to be cared for, or at least appreciated, Abner sighed. The bird woman looked up from her seat on the bench and smiled. You are appreciated by me, loyal friend. Also by my birds, for you make a good perch. Abner did not much appreciate the birds perching upon him, but he didn't wish to hurt the kind old woman's feelings. He kept his thoughts on the birds and their messy habits to himself, and waited for the lamplighter to come. The sky grew dark, and shadows lengthened. The sky turned gray. Rain sprinkled from a dreary gray sky, causing the bird woman to open her umbrella. Normally she left when it rained, but the lamplighter was late, and if she departed, Abner would be alone in the dark. I will stay till he comes, old friend, she whispered. She blended into the shadows, her rags bunched about her like the feathers of a dusty pigeon. Though grateful for the company, Abner couldn't help but worry. The lamplighter had never been this late before. What if the old man had slipped during his rounds? What if he were hurt? What if he were lying alone, in the cold, cold rain? A man could freeze on a night like this. Finally, a bright point of light emerged from the growing fog. The lamplighter trudged toward them, his long pole to light the lamp in one hand, a lantern in the other. He reached the lamp-post, shook his head, and sighed before going about his task. What's wrong, old friend? The bird woman asked. The old man started, for he had not noticed her there. She was a creature of magic, and therefore very hard for eyes to see. This is my last night on the job. The young men at City Hall have voted to replace the candle-lit lamp-posts with new incandescent bulbs that light themselves. There is no more need for me. If Abner could have shuddered, he probably would have done so hard enough that his glass would have shattered. The old woman touched his iron pole. And what will happen to the old posts? Tomorrow morning, a crew will come and take them down, sold for scrap, most likely. A shame. He tilted his head up toward Abner's lantern, eyes glinting in the soft glow. I always felt there was a special dignity to these old lamps. It feels wrong to cast them aside. For a moment, Abner forgot his fear for himself, for the lamplighter was old and frail. What would become of him with no more lamps to light? Will you be all right? The woman asked the question plaguing Abner. The old man nodded. I was getting too old for this job anyway. I have children to care for me. I will be fine. He shook his head. You should get inside, ma'am. It's going to be a cold night. I wouldn't be surprised if this rain turns to snow and ice shortly. The lamplighter melted into the misty night, as if the fog had reached out and wrapped him in a gray blanket. Abner stared into the darkness. It was one thing to be stuck, but another thing altogether to be thrown away, sold for scrap, unwanted. He supposed there were other lamp-posts out tonight, feeling very much the same way, as sad as he was. Perhaps I should feel bad, but I shouldn't feel alone. What will become of me and my brothers? The old lady turned a tearful gaze up at him. Oh, Abner, this is my fault. You have no brothers. The other lamp-posts are all cold iron and glass. Only you have a heart and a mind. I sat beneath you for years, feeding the birds, and the love I gave them melted into you and made you something special. If not for me, you would only be lifeless metal, and you would not feel such pain. What I thought to be a gift is now a burden. Abner considered this. He hadn't really thought about why he could think and converse with the bird woman when the bench, the sidewalk, and the street could not. He had assumed it was simply a trait of lampposts, but now it turned out only he was alive. No, it was a gift, he decided. Perhaps my life is over, but I had a life, and I am the only lamppost ever to be who can say that, or anything. Yes, yes, and I will give you one more gift. When darkness falls, my old friend, you will no longer be anchored. You will be able to wander the streets and out of the city as far as you can to see what you will. Go quickly, however, for when dawn comes, you will magically be returned to your post. Take care that no one sees you, but enjoy your night of freedom, Abner the Steadfast. With that, she placed her umbrella against Abner's metal spine. A shock went through him. He quivered until his glass panes rattled. When he looked down, the bird woman was gone. Only the umbrella remained. Without thinking, Abner bent down and picked up the umbrella. It was only after this simple action was complete that he realized how impossible it really was. Yet it had happened. Metal arms had peeled away from his metal sides, with metal hands and metal fingers at the end. He raised his feet, no longer figurative. They clanked against the sidewalks. He took his first step at a bound, slipped on a patch of ice, and wobbled. The umbrella opened in his hand, slowing his fall. Steady again, he took a slower second step, then a third, and a fourth, until he was slowly but surely making his way down the deserted street. On his way, he passed many a lamppost, tall, still, and silent, like sentinels in the night. The first two he addressed, touched with the umbrella even as the bird woman had touched him. Nothing happened, and he gave up trying to stir his fellow lamps. Instead, he walked along a wide boulevard. It was empty of traffic, but warm lights and soft music drifted from a tall building across the way. A couple emerged, arm in arm. Abner froze. The man and woman laughed and spun together in time to the distant music, then ducked their heads against the driving rain and hurried away. His heart lighter for this glimpse of happiness, Abner strolled through the park. A deer stared wide-eyed at him. Abner had never seen a deer before, and thought for a moment it was either a strange dog or a small horse. Before he could decide, however, it sprang over a hedge in a graceful leap and disappeared into the night. He left the stone path. The rain had frozen upon the grass, which now crunched like shards of glass beneath his feet. It caused him no pain, for every bit of him was made of metal. The rain turned to hard pellets of ice, plinking against his glass. Not wanting to risk his light going out, he held the umbrella up over his face. Beyond the park, he found the river, a slow, black field alive with the sound of lapping water. A bell clanged as a boat drifted by. A man sang, his voice sonorous in the quiet night. The words of his tune faded as the boat continued on its path. With long strides, Abner went in the opposite direction, determined to see as much as he could before his special night ended. The streets became narrower and darker. Fewer of his fellow lampposts stood sentry, and many that remained were unlit. He found one, like him, standing over a bench, though unlike his tidy bench, this was covered by scraps of newspaper. The lamppost itself had all the glass knocked out of the lantern. Abner stared solemnly at his lifeless brother's side. Yes, this lamppost hadn't been given the magical gift of life, but it had still served its purpose well, only to be ruined and abandoned by careless men. As he stood in thought, a cough alerted him to an approaching man. He froze, allowing his new arms to melt back into his sides and his feet to join with the sidewalk. The umbrella fell to the ground. A man in a threadbare coat limped down the sidewalk. The garment swung about his frail, thin frame. When he reached the bench, he paused and gazed up at Abner. "A new lamppost. My, how fine." He sat, still admiring Abner's warm glow. "It makes this night seem a little less cold." If Abner had a heart, it would have been pounding. Why wouldn't this man move on so he could continue exploring the city and enjoying his one night of freedom? The sleet hammered down upon them, and Abner longed to reach for his umbrella. The man, however, continued to sit and shiver. His teeth chattered noisily. "Go home," Abner whispered. But the man was not the bird woman and could not hear. After a bit, however, Abner realized this man probably had no home to go to. The man lay upon the bench and arranged the abandoned newspapers over his body. He shivered and shook, then lay silent. Abner hesitated. If the man was truly asleep, Abner could move on without being seen. He leaned closer. The man didn't stir. Abner's light fell across a weary old face that reminded him a little of the lamplighter, but thinner, sadder, wearier somehow. The man was cold, hungry, and if he were left to sleep in this cold, with the frozen rain falling upon him and no source of heat, he might very well freeze before dawn. Picking up the umbrella, Abner tried to position it so it covered the sleeping man's body. However, he swiftly realized that even if he managed to get it to stand without him holding it, he couldn't leave it there. It belonged to the bird woman and was tied to her magic. Also, as small as it was, the light of his lantern gave the man heat. His skin reddened and warmed wherever the light touched. After some hesitation, Abner positioned himself so as much of his light as he could manage fell over the man, and so the umbrella kept off the freezing rain. Hours ticked on. Abner was accustomed to standing watch with nothing else to do, but never before had there been an option of something else to do, something he wanted to do. Every time he considered abandoning his post, however, he remembered those who had been kind to him, the faithful lamplighter who had come every evening to light his lamp, the bird woman who had granted him life and given so much to so many others. If they could give their lives to help people with nothing in return, he could spend one night aiding this poor, cold man. A line of pink crept over the housetops. Morning was coming. The bird woman had said he would be summoned to his old post when that happened. Would the poor man be all right? A clatter of horse hooves caused him to jerk upright. If the human guiding the car saw him stooping over the bench holding an umbrella, everyone would know something strange was afoot. What consequences that would have, he didn't know, but the bird woman hadn't wanted it to happen, and that was enough for him. The carriage drew closer, then pulled to a stop. A man jumped down from the seat and approached the man on the bench. "You slept out here? How are you still alive?" The man would be safe. Even as the assurance swept over Abner, the pull of the bird woman's magic called him home. The world blurred, then reformed as his own corner of elm and mane. The bird woman smiled. "What a loyal and true being you are, Abner, to give your one night up for a stranger." Abner wished to return her umbrella, but found he could not move. Again, he was frozen in place, no arms, only figurative feet. The bird woman reached down and picked her umbrella up from the ground. "You are truly worthy. Take this one last gift." She tapped him with her umbrella again, and again the world swirled about them. An hour later, when the crew arrived to cut down and scrap the lamppost at Elm and Main, they found no lamppost there. The crew leader scratched his head. "Wasn't there one here on the list, boss?" one of the men asked. "I thought there was." The leader checked his notes. "Yes, sure as anything, there should have been a lamppost here at the corner of Elm and Main. Instead, there was a bare patch of earth with a single sparrow sitting upon it, a fat, happy sparrow with a golden mark upon its breast that to the leader's eye resembled the flame of a candle. The bird gave a trill of happy song and flew into the air, soaring above rooftops, heading toward faraway lands and amazing adventures.
I hope you enjoyed listening to At the Corner of Elm and Main by H.L. Burke, narrated by Paeter Frandsen of Christian Geek Central. If you want to read more by Heidi, go to hlburkeauthor.com to find more of her books. If you enjoyed listening to Paeter narrate the story, you might also enjoy listening to his podcast, Christian Geek Central, where he discusses movies, video games, and all things enjoyed by self proclaimed geeks from a Christian worldview. If this is where you typically tune out or turn off the podcast, don't forget there's a second story. It's written by Savannah Jezowski, and I have to admit that my mind was blown when I realized she and Everly Haywood are one and the same. I don't know why it feels like I discovered some superhero's secret identity, but it does. And it almost makes me want to adopt a pen name so someday I can give someone else that feeling. Savannah writes swoony sweet romantic fantasy under the pen name Everly Haywood, with a focus on strong leading ladies and brooding but huggable heroes. An advocate for her goblin princess with Down syndrome, she also features characters with disabilities. When she isn't tangled up in magical curses or drinking pumpkin spice coffee, she can be found weeding her garden, homeschooling her fairy princess, and reading. Stick around to the end to find out how you can snag a free book from Everly, who is actually Savannah. My shock is actually sort of embarrassing because she very clearly has both names on her Instagram. Anyway, more about her in a minute. Please enjoy Tears of the Sea by Savannah Jezowski. They say it is an abomination to leave the sea. In the darkness of the sea caves, the mothers croon that to us while we are still cocooned in our eggs, long before we even know who we are. They tell us that the sea is our realm, that we belong to her, and she to us. It is an unbreakable bond, and no one ever truly leaves the sea. No one wants to. But I have always been different. I hatched too early and was born with a disfigured fin, my body smaller and weaker than the others. My skin was a mottled white, with only hints of green, while all my brothers and sisters were born in vibrant shades of aqua and turquoise and amber. My mother claims this is why I am unreasonable, why I long for things I shouldn't, why I ask the questions no one else ever thinks to. You must fight the weakness, Lorraine, she told me once, as she tucked me and the other hatchlings into our hollows, covering us with seaweed wraps to stave off the chill of the night waters. You must not go the way of the sandwalkers. They are abominations. That night, I dreamed that I swam to the shore, stood up on two legs, and walked away from the sea. Ever since then, I have wondered what would really happen if I tried to leave the sea. No one will tell me. It is an abomination, they say. I like to go to the coves and hide among the rocks near the shore and watch the life beyond the water. It is beautiful in its own way, in a sharper, clearer sense. On land, things are not hidden behind aquamarine ripples. The plants do not waft in the currents, but are instead stirred in gentle breezes. I like the feel of the wind, but the sun dries out my skin. Here, the water is almost too warm, the shallow waters heated by the sun. It is here, in my rocky hideaway, that I first see them. It is only the two of them, a male and a female. They came from the forest and built a shelter on the beach. During the day, the male fishes in their little boat, his dark skin glistening in the sunlight. At night, they sit on the beach and hold hands. The murmur of their voices and occasional bursts of laughter echo across the gentle swell of the waves. I long to know what they say to each other. The mer do not laugh, not often. I asked one of the elder mer once why that was so, and he said, "Laughter is a foolish thing when there are mouths to feed." But the sandwalkers do not live by this code. They work endlessly and often go hungry, but still they laugh. They always laugh. One day, the sandwalker brings his boat close to my hiding place. I wait under the water in the shadow of the rocks while he dives into the water to fish. It amazes me that he can swim without fins, but his long legs propel him through the water. He surfaces frequently for air, as he has no gills. My fingers press against the soft row of slits along my throat. He catches a fish in his mouth and surfaces to toss it into the boat. He does not have much success, but persists throughout the day. I watch him until he returns to the shore as the sun is lowering in the sky. The water has begun to cool and soothes my sun-baked skin. So, this is where you hide. I dive into the water at the intrusion into my thoughts. A mer waits for me deeper down, concealed in the shadows. It is one of the guardians, Selkin. I should tell your brother where you play, Merling. You follow me? I dart up to him so that our faces are only inches apart. It is a challenge, but he merely splays his palm across my forehead, the way elders do to the young. It is often a fond gesture, but I find it demeaning. To me, it means that I am young and foolish and amuse him. I do not need following, especially from a guardian only 2 hatches beyond me. Oma may not think so. Selkin no longer smiles, the dark seaweed green of his eyes filled with troubling thoughts, like stormy water churned up by angry winds. My heart throbs faintly. I know my older brother would most certainly agree with the young guardian. They were bonded, sworn friends. They never disagree. Oma does not need to know everything. He shakes his head at my suggestion. I bare my teeth at him, but I am angrier at myself than him. I swim back up to the surface, knowing it will irk him. To my surprise, he splashes out right onto my rock beside me. I have never seen him out of the water before. His skin is a deep aquamarine, with swirls that are almost pearl and silver. Even in the darkness of the deep water, I could always see his color. But not like this. Not with the sun glinting off his scales. He is beautiful. I look down at my arm and rub skin that lacks vibrancy, that is muted and sickish. I am like a dirty little clam. I almost fall back into the water when he takes my hand and examines it, rubbing the fingers and the webbing between them, as if he has never seen a hand before. I try to pull away, but he tightens his grip. You're not like the others. His voice is surprisingly mellow. I find that I like the sound of it. I turn my face away. It doesn't matter if he alludes to only my sisters, or to all the mer. I don't look like any of them. You're going to get hurt, Lorraine. His adamancy causes me to turn my face back toward his, my eyes to his eyes. A shudder ripples through me, tightening into a ball in the pit of my stomach. What do you mean? Selkin jerks his head toward the shore. Sandwalkers are dangerous, Merling. You shouldn't come here anymore. I'm just watching. The way he looks at me makes me feel as if he can read my heart and see the truth. That I do much more than watch. That I dream about walking on the sand. Be careful that your watching does not become your downfall. His words burden me, but that is something I am used to. He insists on taking me back to the caves, and I sigh, knowing it will be a hard swim. But to my surprise, he matches pace with me and stops occasionally to point out a fish that he saw that I cannot see, or to comment on a reef that looks extraordinarily average. I feel like he is looking out for me, and I do not know if I should be flattered or offended. I deliberately pick up the pace. It is late when we return, and my mother is waiting for me. Judging by the furrow between her eyes, I know she is upset. And as soon as she sees Selkin with me, she darts out to meet us, her lithe fin propelling her through the dark water. "What have you been doing?" Her thoughts are forceful, angry, but laced with relief. "We were together," Selkin tells her, matter-of-factly. "Together?" Something in my mother's tone bothers me. Selkin is well liked in our pod. I am the last mer he would ever spend time with willingly, but the way she says "together" means something more than "we swam home from the cove admiring imaginary fish." "I was at the cove. He made me come home." I watch the truth drain the color from her cheeks. She looks at me, no thoughts connecting us, but I know what she is thinking. I am always a disappointment. "We were at the cove," he admits, scowling at me. "Together." I wrinkle my nose at him, knowing he meant to irk me and feeling irked. For some reason, my mother snorts. I glance at her, startled by the bubbles dancing from her parted lips and up her delicate cheeks. She seals her lips and jerks her head toward our cave. This means I will hear more later, but not in front of Selkin. I begin to swim away when Selkin's thoughts interrupt me. "I would have wished to speak to her father." My father is dead, killed many years ago by the striped shark that harasses the coastal waters. There is only one reason why Selkin would confess something so personal to my mother, and it is a ludicrous reason. "Oma will hear your words," my mother tells him, casting me a furtive glance I cannot interpret. "We are willing." "You are willing," I tell her, deliberately blocking Selkin from my thoughts. "I am not. This is Oma's doing. I won't be fish bait for my brother." "Selkin is a noble hunter, and Oma will give his blessing. This is best, I think." "Best for who? You put them up to this, I see. You think a noble husband will make me a noble mother?" When she does not deny the accusation, I know it is the truth. "Why is it so wrong for me to go to the cove? I just like to watch them. They are not like us, Lorraine." She catches my face in her webbed fingers and peers earnestly into my eyes. "They have turned their backs on the sea. They are the most dangerous adversaries you will ever encounter. I beg you to see reason." "Sand walkers are not monsters." "They are more dangerous than monsters. They are betrayers." Selkin's thoughts intrude into our conversation. Clearly, my mother is feeding him my thoughts. Or perhaps I am simply being careless and letting him in. Very well, let him eavesdrop. What he hears will surely make him despise me. Maybe they are not as bad as we have been told. I think about the sandwalkers on the beach, how they live, how they love, how they laugh. My mother's face darkens in anger. "You are hopeless." "See?" I turn to Selkin, my heart strangely heavy. It is pointless. I am beyond hope. I bare my teeth and spin away, swimming as fast as I can toward the cave. In my haste, I misjudge a turn, and my damaged fin cannot keep me from smashing into a rock outcropping. I hiss with pain. Wounded, angry, I swim to my hollow. When I awake the next morning, my body still aches from the impact. I am grateful my mother did not force me to speak more on the subject, and she still sleeps as I leave the cave. I see Oma and some of the guardians above me, their bodies silhouetted against the clear water sparkling in the morning sunlight. No doubt they are scanning the early morning waters for hungry predators. He sees me and frowns. Selkin has told him of my behavior, I am sure. A lecture will be forthcoming if I do not disappear soon. I am nearly to the cove when I hear the water stirring behind me. Instincts drive me toward the bottom of the sea, scattering a school of stingrays as I seek shelter on the reef. My heart thunders in my ears as I scan the water for dangers. It is only me. I loose a mouthful of exasperated bubbles as Selkin's amused thoughts force themselves on me. He appears above me, unarmed but for a black stone knife sheathed onto his arm. He is clearly not out to hunt. You are fortunate I am not a shark, Merling, and you that I am unarmed, I hiss at him. The tiny fins along the curve of my jawline flared in anger. I am sure Oma sent him after me. I ignore him and continue on my way, but I can hear the water stirring as he follows. As I near the rocks, my skin crawls with unease. The water is still and quiet, crystal clear. I can easily see that all around us the seabed is deserted. I scan the waters anxiously. Selkin's hand encases my arm in a biting grip. A shadow passes over us. I flinch and shift closer to him, peering up as the fisherman's boat glides over us from the right, where trees cast long shadows over the water. Relief floods through me, but then I notice that the bottom of the boat sinks deep into the water, weighted down. Something is wrong. Selkin tugs on my arm, clearly indicating that we should leave, but I want to know what is happening. I try to pull away, but he bares his teeth and jerks his head toward the deep water. Please, just a moment. Vibrations ripple through the water. Selkin yanks me down to the bottom of the seabed, shielding my body with his. I glance up, just as the sandwalker plunges into the water. A dark red stain mingles with the water and begins to swirl around the motionless body. I stare up into the blank face of my sandwalker. When I scream into the water, Selkin whips his knife out of the sheath and twists to see what I see. I yank at his arm, screaming for him to stop. It's my sandwalker. As one, we glance upward, watching as the boat jags away. I slip free while Selkin is distracted and rush to the sandwalker. He is heavier than he appears, but I pull him behind the rocks and get him out of the water. No gills, but I feel the faint pulsing of his lifeblood beneath his skin. The boat is headed straight for the beach, for the hut. Selkin is screaming at me, his mental barrage hammering against my head. They are going to kill her. Somehow, I know this. Perhaps everything the Mer have told me is true. It's monstrous to kill your own. I throw back my head and scream. The sound of the Mer cry reverberates across the water, echoing over the lapping waves, rich and filled with a strength I didn't know I possessed. The sandwalker emerges from the hut, cries out, and disappears into the forest. The men on the boat are shouting and waving weapons in the air. Selkin yanks me back beneath the waves. What do you think you are doing? They are going to kill her. Even before the thought has fully formed, I am swimming toward the boat. I can hear Selkin behind me, feel his fingers grabbing for my fin, but I dart out of his grasp in an awkward pinwheel and angle up toward the boat. Gritting my teeth, I smash into the bottom of the boat full force. 2 men topple into the water. I can barely hear their screams over the ringing of my own exploding head. I grab the man nearest me and yank him down to the seabed. He screams and thrashes until I release him. I let him surface and gulp at the air before grabbing him again and dragging him back to the bottom in a flurry of frantic bubbles. I do this twice before he begins to swim frantically for the shore. Powerful hands grab me from behind, dark sandwalker hands. They squeeze into the soft flesh of my arms, surely leaving bruises. Selkin darts around me and yanks the sandwalker away, killing him with one swift stroke of his knife. Blood erupts into the water, rippling over the both of us. Horrified, I stroke backward to free myself of the contaminated water. The other sandwalkers flee to the shore and disappear into the jungle. I touch my forehead to Selkin's hands, acknowledging that he has saved my life, that I am now indebted to him. He says nothing, but helps drag the injured sandwalker toward the shore. "We should leave him here, in the rocks," Selkin says, his rich voice grim, almost deadly. Our eyes meet, and I realize how worried he truly is. We both could have met our deaths this day. "I can't leave him here," I whisper. Frustration mars his beautiful face as he shoves away and sinks mostly below the water, his seaweed green eyes churning with anger. I continue alone, dragging my sandwalker to the sandy beach. The woman sees us coming and emerges from the jungle, running toward me. As soon as he is in the shallow water, I slither backward, back toward the sea. But she cries out to me, dropping to her knees and wrapping her slender, dark arms around her beloved. For the first time, we truly see each other. I know the look in her weeping eyes. I have seen that look before, in my mother's eyes, when elder brother saved her youngest hatchling from the belly of the white shark. We call it the owing. My mother will forever be in elder brother's debt, as I will forever be in Selkin's. I see the owing in the sandwalker's black eyes now as she walks toward me. It would be a dishonor to swim away without giving her the satisfaction of acknowledging her debt. It is the nature of the owing. I use my arms to push myself up from the surf and drag my scales through the sand. It is difficult, but I struggle until the surf no longer reaches me. The sun burns into my scales, sizzling as the water drains away and evaporates. I have never experienced such pain as when my scales begin to fall away. By the time I find my feet and try to stand, the pain has left me, replaced by a soothing coolness that wraps around my body. I am different, but I am still me. I stagger, wrapped in a mess of seaweed. She thrusts her arms around me before I hit the sand, the words that pour from her lips as foreign to me as the legs that now replace my scales. But somehow, I understand her. She points to her sandwalker, the lover, the fisherman, and presses her cheek to mine. I shiver as her warm flood of tears cascades down my cheek and onto my lips. I taste them and shudder with shock as my tongue recognizes the taste of her tears. Salty, like my scales. Salty, like the sea. The truth of our kinship will forever change my course. How can we be enemies when sandwalkers weep the sea? I return to the water, smiling as the wet sand squishes between my toes. I dive into the surf and feel my legs twine together, once again a mangled fin. I call out to Selkin with my thoughts. You came back then. His thoughts pelt me, fast, almost incoherent. I can barely contain my excitement. I see him at last, swimming toward me with slow but powerful strokes. We hover just below the surface, with sunlight casting rippling rays around us. His skin is a rainbow of vibrant colors. He stares at me. I can feel his thoughts, rumbling on the edge of my subconscious, like a storm brewing far off on the horizon. He is trying to block them from me, but I can read snatches. He is angry, afraid, relieved. It's not as we've been told. I have tasted the tears of sandwalkers. They haven't abandoned the sea, Selkin. They keep it in their tears. Selkin stares at me, his eyes dark, troubled. At last he raises his hand and splays his palm over my forehead. This time the gesture feels fond and not demeaning. You're not like the others, Lorraine. Is that so bad? He does not answer me, but his thoughts are less abrasive, no longer hammering at me in frustration. He takes my hand in his, and I think about my sandwalkers, laughing on their beach. Perhaps we ought not tell your mother, or Oma, about this, Selkin says at last, his lips lifted at the corners in a hint of amusement. At first, I am frustrated. I want to tell everyone what I have learned, to prove that I was right all along, and that they have all been wrong. But he squeezes my hand and drifts closer. So close, I can see nothing but the dark of his eyes. They are not ready, he whispers to me. His thoughts are gentle, private, and I find myself giving in to his logic. There will be a time, he promises. I hold you to it, I say grudgingly. He smiles openly this time, and I find he is much more pleasant when he smiles. I smile tentatively in return, and do not pull my hand from his. Do you really wish to speak to Oma? I ask, feeling unusually shy. He does not answer with thoughts, but his smile and the look in his eyes is answer enough. A school of minnows shimmer nearby. They spiral around us, unafraid, then dart away into a sea of sandwalker tears. I hope you enjoyed listening to Tears of the Sea by Savannah Jezowski, narrated by Karyne Norton. If you want to read more by Savannah, go to everlyhaywood.com, because remember, that's her pen name, to find more of her books. You can sign up for her newsletter there to snag Dark Affliction, which is one of my favorite newsletter freebies to date, and I've read a ton because that's where I find a lot of stories for the podcast. Speaking of newsletters, if you want to get email reminders for new episodes, be sure to sign up for the Finding Fantasy Reads newsletter. I also include links to deals on audiobooks, new releases, and freebies from our featured authors, as well as anything else that I think might interest someone who enjoys fantasy audiobooks and short stories. I will have links for both authors' sites and the newsletter in the show notes. Thank you all for listening, and happy reading.